Hello and welcome to Tier 3 of the Cognitohazard Iceberg. So on Tier 1 and 2, we talked about a lot of stuff, but none of it was super strange, super dark, or that conspiratorial, at least not until the end of Tier 2. But Tier 3 is a lot of stuff that does get into that territory. This might also be the tier where I have to kind of tiptoe around stuff for YouTube, so if I don't talk too much about a topic, but just kind of break it down to very basic, essential stuff, that's why. I also wanted to acknowledge that Illuminati was originally on Tier 2, but I felt that it needed to be pushed up to Tier 3. One, because it made editing the Tier 2 video a lot easier, but also because I really do feel like it is a Tier 3 topic. So yeah, it's been pushed here. I also want to say thank you for all the support that Part 1 and 2 got. It's been tremendous. I'm very grateful, and it does show me that people want this series to continue. So as long as people continue to support the series, I will continue to put parts out as fast as I possibly can. There may be a little bit of time once we get into the layer tiers where I have to take like 2 weeks or so to kind of put them together, because I have to figure out a way to record those in a way that won't get me banned off YouTube with a lot of the topics that I have to cover. So without further ado, without further yapping, thank you for watching, and let's get into Tier 3. First up on Tier 3, we have the Illuminati. The Illuminati is supposedly a secretive group that runs the world behind the scenes, everything from politicians to business to basically anything you can think of. This was originally on Tier 2 of the iceberg, but I moved it to Tier 3 because 1, that video was becoming a pain to edit because there were so many entries, and 2, it just felt more like a Tier 3 topic. What's interesting about the Illuminati is, while I won't really feel the need to cover it right now that much, there is an entry on Tier 8 that directly ties to the Illuminati, so I feel like I'll talk about it more then, but the basic premise is just that there's a small handful of people that run the entire world. Solipsism is the belief that everything that is known about the world is what you know about yourself. The idea is effectively that the only true thing in the world that you can know is everything that's inside you, from your knowledge to how you as a person function. For example, I don't necessarily know that anything that's told to me is true, but I know the facts about me are true. It's a very strange idea. Solipsism is kind of... it's generally a view of selfishness, but what's interesting about it as a philosophy is it's kind of been discredited over the years and conflicts with a lot of other philosophies, so people don't generally look at it too fondly. It's an interesting concept, but it's one that's not really looked upon with any sort of real seriousness. Pascal's wager is the idea that it is better to believe in God because the benefits outweigh the potential negatives. The idea is effectively that if you believe in God, it's better because you are guaranteed eternal happiness and a positive afterlife, whereas not believing in God could land you in purgatory or hell. So the idea is effectively that even though you don't believe in the religion and its teachings, it's a good idea to do so because the benefits outweigh the costs. It's a very strange and interesting kind of idea, and again, it's a very narcissistic sort of viewpoint and nihilistic viewpoint of philosophy. Aphantasia is interesting because I kind of knew what this was, but I didn't know the name of it until I was researching this. It is the idea that somebody cannot physically picture something in their mind. While you or I could look at a picture and then later think of that picture in our head and kind of go over what it is in detail, somebody who has aphantasia can't do that. They will see the picture with their eyes, but their brain won't be able to recreate it in their head later. It's a very interesting thing, and I knew what it was, but I wasn't aware of its name. Chakras are the idea that there are energy centers hidden within parts of the body that not only are entrances for spiritual energy, but also spiritual beings. It's a very complex and kind of weird thing to talk about, and I feel like I couldn't do it in like one section of one video and would have to just devote an entire video to it. But what's interesting about this is it will directly tie into something next here. Cryogenics is the study and science of freezing technology. The idea is effectively that if someone or something could be frozen for preservation and future use, they could be frozen at a point in time where whatever is wrong with them could be fixed or cured. For example, if you had cancer and you got frozen via cryogenic technology, you could could be unfrozen at a time when they had a cure for cancer. The Epstein flight logs are a list of names of celebrities, politicians, and business people that flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet known as the Lolita Express. What's interesting about this is that if this were ever to become public knowledge, it would effectively reshape the entirety of how most of the world works, as most of the people in power would probably be removed from power due to being pedophiles. Dark patterns are one of two things from what I read. The first is it's the idea that websites, more specifically nefarious websites, use tricks to get you to click on things that you shouldn't be clicking on, such as making ads that look like they're part of the page, or part of the page that looks like an ad, so you click on an ad later. There's also things with dark patterns where people say that they see patterns on things like walls and doors that depict satanic entities. Gnosticism is an interesting topic and one that's far too complex to explain in the short amount of time that I have, but effectively it's the idea that you can only really seek God by seeking inward rather than outward. It is also a general belief that under Gnosticism you are supposed to reject societal norms and societal laws in order to follow spiritual norms and spiritual laws. Spells are magical incantations that are believed to do things, and they are mostly formed of glyphs and sigils and various other things, but we'll get more into that when we talk about another thing kind of later down on this tier of the iceberg. MKUltra was a US government experiment run by the CIA officially from the 1950s to the 1960s, although there has been evidence stating that it effectively went up until the 80s. What's interesting about MKUltra was it was basically a drug trial by the United States performed on human beings to see if they could not only unlock human potential, but also see if it could force truth out of people or weaken their mental defenses during interrogations. The MKUltra program itself has been blamed for many things over the years, including Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who we talked about last year when we talked about manifestos. It's an interesting topic and one that could easily be its own video, but I'm going to leave it at that because we have a lot to talk about. Sigils or glyphs are basically a secretive language or alternative language used in magic spells, which we kind of talked about earlier. The idea is that by reading and or saying these glyphs or sigils out loud, a person can create a magical spell or incantation. Determinism is the belief that every single action you take is external to your own will. The idea is that you are being more so guided by fate rather than making your own decisions. The whole thing just ties into fate itself and the belief that nothing we do is of our own free will, but rather some grander scheme by the universe or God or what have you. Moral objectivism is the belief that there is only one correct choice per course of action. The idea is that effectively if you had a friend in need, the correct moral decision would be to either help them yourself or to call 911 for that person if it was, say, a medical emergency. However, if you were to, say, call somebody to help a friend who is in minor need, that would be considered morally incorrect because you can do it yourself. What's interesting about moral objectivism is the idea that there are various versions of it. For example, one group of people or one person may think differently from what another person or another group of people think. So moral objectivism kind of falls down to whoever you talk to about it. It's a very strange kind of topic, but that's like the best I can explain it. The body keeps the score is the idea that as you get older, your body kind of ages and keeps up with what you did when you were younger. For example, if you were heavily into alcohol and drugs when you were in your teens and 20s, your body will start to feel that into your 50s and 60s. DMT entities are hallucinations people see when they are on dimethyltryptamine. This is a psychedelic drug that has been used in various medical trials and is in certain medications and other things. Well, what's interesting about it is not only do 94% of people see these visions and these hallucinations, but 94% of people also see all the same things. They'll have apocalyptic dreams, they'll see things like elves. It's a very interesting topic, and I think it's something to do with how the chemical alters your brain, but yeah, it's really weird. Schopenhauer was a philosopher who believed that there was no such thing as free will, and that true happiness does not exist, but rather humans experience moments of temporary happiness. Much like what we talked about earlier with Solipsism, this is a very nihilistic and narcissistic ideal, and is also kind of looked down upon in the world of philosophy, although nowhere near as much as Solipsism. Gene editing is a scientific process in which a piece of genetic material is either added, removed, or altered in some way in order to get a desired result. The idea is that through gene editing, the human race will continue to evolve to eventually do things like breathe underwater or be able to fall from incredibly high heights without dying, etc., etc. And the way this is often tested is on animals, where they try and do things like give a fish more gills, or they try to add extra limbs to an insect, various things. What's interesting about gene editing is there are conspiracies that say it's been applied to human trafficking victims by world governments to see if they can advance the evolution process. So this is a good time to mention that there was a entry on the iceberg that I couldn't tell if it was 1 or 2 entries, but it said Extinction Revolution, and I don't know if those were 2 entries and they were just put side by side in a really weird spot. In which case I removed Revolution because there was absolutely no need for it to be there. But if Extinction Revolution is a real thing and is a one kind of like entry to the iceberg, somebody tell me what it is in the comments, because I searched and searched and searched and I could not find it. I tried really, really hard. I did like 2 days of research on it and I could not find a single thing relating to it. But I guess we can talk about Extinction, which I kind of feel like should have been a tier 2 topic, but it's fine, it's on tier 3, whatever. Extinction is when a species ceases to be. The idea is that there may be an extinction event for humanity upcoming at some point in the future, where it's like a year from now or 1,000 bajillion years from now, and effectively during an extinction event, that entire species is wiped out, either by a superior predator or by a cataclysmic event like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, or various other things. But it's generally believed that the human extinction event will either come in the form of a meteor like what happened with the dinosaurs, or that we will create an AI that eventually kills us. That is the idea. Having kids later is worse refers to the fact that the older you get when you have children, the worse off their lives will be. For example, an older person cannot keep up with the needs and demands of a child, like for example the physical activities they might get into. But also there is the fact that if you're too old when you have children, the child is very, very likely to be born with Down syndrome or autism or various other illnesses and defects, etc., etc. And what's interesting about this is it's been kind of noted that millennials and Zoomers are having children older and older, and because of this, children are going to be worse off both genetically and in terms of parenting. Binaural beats are an auditory illusion similar to an optical illusion, where if a person hears 2 notes together, they may perceive a third note that doesn't actually exist. What's interesting about binaural beats is that there's 2 things kind of associated with them that, while scientifically not proven, are generally believed. The first is that they aid in the function of sleep, because a lot of times when they're formed, it creates sort of this like very melodic and relaxing sound, but also it is believed that they can actually unlock parts of the brain that were not previously available to the person. So effectively you are increasing the percentage of which your brain is used when you listen to binaural beats. It's interesting, neither have ever been proven, but the sleep one at least seems to be true from everything we can gather. There's no evidence about the whole brain unlocking, increasing the percentage of your brain use thing. Thalassophobia is a fear of the ocean, and what's interesting about this is it's generally believed that thalassophobia comes from the fact that there were a lot of ocean predators during the early stages of humanity, and that we as humans were not meant to be near or in the ocean at all, and we should leave it alone because God knows what's down there. Mouth-to-mouth CPR, I'm not really sure why this is this low, but basically what mouth-to-mouth CPR is that it is a technique used to revive a person. Effectively what you do is you put your mouth over that person's mouth in order to breathe air into their lungs, because their lungs can't do it themselves. Hacking arms race refers to the fact that we are no longer in the space race with other countries, but rather in a race to see who can create the best and strongest technology, and who can break into other technologies the fastest and easiest. Machiavellianism is a form of manipulation. What's interesting about Machiavellianism is, unlike a lot of other forms of manipulation where you try to force somebody to do something that you want them to do so you can gain something. Machiavellianism is almost exclusively done to cause somebody to accidentally deal harm to themselves or death to themselves. Panpsycism at its core is a weird concept, but it is the belief that because every single thing in existence contains atoms, molecules, etc., that effectively every single thing in the universe, whether it's a human being or a block of steel, contains some sort of mental capability. It's a theory that is heavily debated because obviously we can't prove that a block of metal or wood would have any sort of mental awareness, but it's an interesting idea, and there are a lot deeper sort of connotations to it and beliefs to it than what I can go to in this video, but it's an interesting thought process nonetheless. What you believe determines your afterlife is the belief of exactly what it says, that whatever you believe is the afterlife you get. For example, if I believe that the afterlife is me being forced to do these videos to the end of time, that's what it will be. Religious exclusivism is an interesting ideal and is one that is held by certain religious groups that effectively heaven only has a certain number of slots available, so the harder you believe in that religion, the better chances you have of filling one of those slots. Heat death is the scientific theory that eventually all the stars in the universe will burn out, and as such there will be no heat left in the universe to sustain any form of life. The McCullough Effect is basically when you either perceive a color wrong by looking at it for too long, or when you look at a certain pattern of color for too long and that color starts to transform into a different color. And what's interesting about this is it's entirely an optical illusion. It is your eyes playing a trick on you in order to make you believe that a color is different than what it actually is because it's mixed in with a pattern. Megalophobia is a fear of big things. It is believed, much like Thalassophobia keeping us away from bodies of water back in the dawn of humanity, that because a lot of the things that preyed on humans were bigger than humans, we are afraid of things that are bigger than us. So before I explain this next one, I do want to give a warning. While everything on here is labeled as a cognitohazard, this one truly deeply is. This is the idea and more or less proven fact that everything gets forgotten with time, and that nothing in life has true permanence. For example, if you, say, built a legacy over a lifetime, that legacy will be forgotten, say, 100, 150 years from now, and even things like a lot of the people who built countries that stand today have been forgotten or have been deemed outdated, and are now either being censored and removed or have simply just been lost to time. This is a very, very dark, sad, and sadly realistic theory, and I don't want to talk about this anymore because it's really depressing. Uncontacted tribes. This talks about the fact that there are a lot of tribes out there, both in North America, Africa, Asia, etc., that are uncontacted and completely cut off from the rest of the world. They hold knowledge that we don't know about because we don't know where they are or how to speak with them. There are also tribes that are too dangerous to contact, as well as groups of people who are too dangerous to contact, which we'll get into much later on this iceberg, don't you worry. But it's an interesting sort of thing, and with stuff like the Dogon tribe, it makes you wonder how much we are missing out on, and we'll get to the Dogon tribe much later as well. Subliminal messaging is a method of getting people to do what you want, say what you want, etc. by giving them subtle messaging that will impact their behavior without them even knowing it. For example, if a advertisement shows you nothing but blue and the product that they're advertising has blue in its name, you are more likely to buy the product because you're already thinking about blue from the rest of the ad. Syncretism is the belief that everything in the world and in the universe in general is running at the same time to affect everything else. It is basically the belief that every single thing that happens and every single thing that will happen is directly tied into one another. So now we're getting into the stuff that I add to the iceberg, starting with the Red Ranger curse. This is the observation that almost every single actor that has played a Red Power Ranger has been at the center of some sort of catastrophe, tragedy, controversy, something like that. There's been a lot of these, and I intend to make a video on this in the future because not only do I love Power Rangers, but I also love really weird and dark and macabre stuff, and this falls right under that. Mandela Effect is when you believe believe something has happened that has not happened. What's interesting about the Mandela Effect is that it usually affects multiple people, and it is believed to tie into the theory we talked about last year that time travel exists but we'll never know about it, and that the Mandela Effect is basically us remembering a previous thing that happened that has now been changed by time travelers. So the reason I put home invasions on here was, well, I did think they could have been a tier 2 topic. We were running out of space on tier 2, and I thought, well, tier 3 is like the next best option. And what's interesting about home invasions is they can happen to anyone at any time, and they are effectively when somebody breaks into your house in order to steal from you, harm you, or kill you. And what's crazy about these and why they are a cognitohazard is that it can happen to literally anyone at any time, regardless of how nice your neighborhood is, how bad your neighborhood is, where it is, who you are. Like, it doesn't matter. It can happen to anyone. And that's terrifying when you actually think about it. Video games with negative auras. This refers to the fact that video games, or at least parts of video games, seem to have some sort of negative energy to them. When you play them, you feel depressed or you feel uncomfortable. Two great examples this are Wet Dry World from Super Mario 64 is often said to have a negative aura to it, and Threed from Earthbound is said to have a negative aura to it. So when you play them, you feel a little bit unnerved, uncomfortable, or you have this sense that something is wrong. It's a really interesting phenomenon. I've never personally experienced this, but I've heard a lot of people talk about this, and I felt like this was probably the best place to put this on. I could have put it on tier 2, but I felt like it wasn't well known enough to do that. But let's get to our last entry on this iceberg. Alice in Chains, Nutshell. This is a very interesting song because one, almost anyone who listens to it feels a sense of depression, but anyone who listens to it repeatedly or repeatedly for a long period of time gets really, really depressed. And what's interesting about the song is, obviously, the song itself is a very depressive song. The song's main lyrics are about drug use and how the media lies about things and general depressive topics. And what's interesting about it is very little of the song actually has lyrics. Most of it is instrumental, but it's also a song that is very highly revered. For example, no one really attempts to make fun of it or parody it or really do anything amusing relating to it, because the song in of itself is just a very, very dark, depressing song. It doesn't really warrant a whole video talking about, but it is very interesting that there's just this one song out there that is perfectly engineered to make you depressed. And with that, we have completed tier 3 of the iceberg. So as of next tier, we will be getting into the really deep, dark stuff. But tier 3 was just kind of wrapping things up and kind of going through a lot of things that we need to talk about and things that we'll set up for later. Like I said, with the Illuminati stuff, that will tie into something on tier 8. There was another thing in here, I can't remember what right now, that tied into something that was on like tier 6 or 7. But yeah, tier 3 was mostly just a lot of that stuff. And I just want to say before the video ends, thank you for watching. The support's been absolutely insane, and I look forward to making more of these videos. So yeah, thanks for watching, and next time.